There is a particular kind of evening that exists at the top of office towers, long after most of the building has gone dark, when the cleaning crews have finished their rounds, when the parking garage below has thinned to a handful of cars, when the only people left moving through the marble lobbies are the ones who stayed too late, for reasons that usually matter more than they should. It was on an evening exactly like that one, on the 41st floor of the Callaway Tower in Midtown, that Sophia Reyes stepped out of her office, locked the door behind her, and walked toward the elevator bank with the particular fatigue of someone who has just spent 3 hours on a phone call that should have taken 30 minutes. She did not notice, at first, that she was not alone in the hallway. Sophia Reyes was 39 years old. She was the chief executive officer of Callaway Dynamics, a logistics and supply chain technology firm that had grown, under her leadership, from a modest regional operation into a company with contracts spanning 3 continents. She was, by any reasonable measure, successful, and she was also, on this particular Thursday evening, simply tired, wearing a cream-colored suit that had felt sharp and composed at 8 that morning and now felt, 14 hours later, like something she was merely still standing inside of. She pressed the call button for the elevator and waited, scrolling through messages on her phone, half aware of footsteps somewhere behind her in the hallway but not especially alarmed by them. People worked late in this building. Footsteps in a hallway after 9 o'clock were not, on their own, remarkable. The elevator arrived. She stepped inside. It was only as the doors began to close that she registered, with a small cold jolt of attention, that 3 men had quickened their pace down the hallway and slipped through the closing doors behind her, not rushing for an elevator they'd nearly missed, the way ordinary stragglers do, but moving with a particular coordinated purpose that made the small hairs on her arms rise before her conscious mind had fully caught up to why. She had, over the years, developed a reasonably good instinct for reading rooms, a skill built through a decade of board meetings and high-stakes negotiations, where the ability to sense when something was wrong before anyone said so out loud had saved her, more than once, from walking blindly into a bad deal. This instinct, now, was telling her, with unmistakable clarity, that something was very wrong. The 3 men did not look at her the way strangers glance at each other in elevators, that brief, polite non-acknowledgement that passes between people sharing a small enclosed space. They positioned themselves instead, almost without seeming to move at all, in a loose triangle around her, and the tallest of them, dark-haired, heavily built, reached toward the panel and pressed a button for a floor well below the lobby, the parking sublevels, where the building's security cameras, she would learn later, had unaccountably gone dark for several minutes that same evening. Sophia's mouth went dry. She had perhaps 3 seconds to understand that she was in real danger, and considerably less than that to do anything useful about it. It was in those 3 seconds that the elevator doors, which had not yet fully closed, were caught by a hand. The man who slipped through the gap was tall, dark-haired, dressed in a navy suit with no tie, his white shirt slightly untucked from a day that had clearly run longer than planned. He moved with the easy, unhurried confidence of someone simply catching a closing elevator, the universal small urgency of office workers everywhere, and for a moment, the 3 men around Sophia regarded him with the brief, irritated assessment people give to an inconvenient stranger interrupting their plans. His name was Marcus Donnelly. He worked 3 floors below Sophia's office, in a far less glamorous capacity, as the building's overnight facilities coordinator, a job he had taken 18 months earlier, after a long and complicated career that none of his current co-workers knew much about, because Marcus had learned, over the years, that some chapters of a person's life are better left unmentioned at the company holiday party. He was, before facilities work, before the modest apartment he shared with his 9-year-old daughter Ruby, before the long, careful process of building an ordinary, quiet life, a former Army combat medic and close protection specialist who had spent 6 years overseas in roles he rarely discussed with anyone, including, most of the time, himself. He had stepped into that elevator not by accident, but because something in the hallway, the particular way 3 men had fallen into step together, the way their eyes had tracked Sophia rather than glancing idly around the lobby, had triggered an old, dormant instinct that he had spent years trying to set down and had never quite managed to fully release. What happened over the next several seconds unfolded with a speed and economy that none of the three men had anticipated, because none of them had any reasonable way of knowing that the unremarkable man in the slightly untucked shirt who had simply caught their elevator possessed training that made the encounter, from a purely practical standpoint, no contest at all. It was not, in the end, the cinematic spectacle it might have appeared from a distance. There was no prolonged struggle. Marcus did not raise his voice, did not announce himself, did not waste a single motion on anything beyond what was strictly necessary. He simply moved, quickly, precisely, with the particular economy of someone who has been trained extensively in exactly this kind of close-quarters disadvantage and has long since stopped needing to think through each individual step. Within moments, two of the men were on the floor of the elevator, restrained in positions that caused considerable discomfort but no lasting harm, and the third, the tallest, found himself pinned firmly against the elevator wall, Marcus's forearm braced calmly but immovably across his chest, the man's own momentum having done most of the work against him. The whole encounter, start to finish, took perhaps 8 seconds. Sophia stood pressed against the back corner of the elevator, her phone clutched against her chest, breathing hard, staring at the scene in front of her with an expression that mixed terror, confusion, and the beginning of something like disbelieving relief. "Are you hurt?" Marcus asked her, his voice remarkably calm given the circumstances, not moving his attention away from the men he was still restraining. "No," Sophia managed. "No, what just happened?" "I'd guess an attempted abduction," Marcus said, with the particular flat clarity of someone describing a situation he had encountered before, under circumstances considerably worse than this one. "I'm sorry I can't explain more right now. Can you hit the emergency stop and call building security? There should be a panel beside the door." Sophia, hands shaking, found the panel and pressed it. The elevator shuddered to a halt between floors. She fumbled for her phone and dialed security, her voice unsteady but functional, the particular adrenaline-fueled clarity that allows a person to perform necessary tasks even while their body is still catching up to what just happened. The three men, pinned and restrained, said nothing useful in those first several minutes, though one of them, the tallest, muttered something under his breath that Marcus caught clearly enough to file away for the police report that would follow, a reference to a rival logistics firm that had, in fact, lost a significant contract to Callaway Dynamics only weeks earlier. Building security arrived within minutes, followed shortly afterward by police, and the elevator car that had nearly become the site of something far darker became instead the scene of a methodical, procedural unwinding, statements taken, the three men removed in handcuffs, Sophia guided to a nearby conference room with a blanket someone produced from an unknown supply closet, the particular shock of adrenaline finally beginning to recede into trembling hands and a hollow, exhausted clarity. It was nearly an hour later, after the building's head of security had finished taking his statement, that Sophia finally had a chance to properly speak with the man who had stepped into that elevator. "I don't even know your name," she said. "Marcus Donnelly," he said. "I work overnight facilities, 2 floors down from your office. We've probably passed each other in the lobby 100 times and never said a word. You probably saved my life tonight," Sophia said quietly. "I don't know how to begin to thank you for that." Marcus looked uncomfortable in the particular way that people who have done something extraordinary often look when the moment arrives to actually discuss it. "I just did what I was trained to do," he said. "I'm glad I happened to be in that hallway." "It wasn't luck," Sophia said. "Was it? You knew something was wrong before the doors even closed." He was quiet for a moment. "I used to do close protection work," he admitted. "Overseas, mostly. I left that life behind a while ago. I don't usually mention it. Easier that way." Sophia studied him for a long moment, this quiet, unassuming man who emptied trash cans and changed light bulbs 3 floors below her office, who had just disarmed 3 men twice his apparent threat level with the calm efficiency of someone simply performing routine maintenance, and who seemed, more than anything else in that moment, faintly embarrassed by the entire situation. "Why facilities work?" she asked. "If you have that kind of background." Marcus considered the question carefully before answering, the way a person answers when they've thought about it many times privately but rarely said it aloud. "I have a daughter," he said. "Ruby. She's 9. Her mother passed away when she was 4, and after that, I made a decision that I wasn't going back overseas anymore, no matter what it paid, no matter what skills it might have wasted. I needed something steady. Something with a schedule I could actually predict, so I'd be home for dinner, home for bedtime, home for the ordinary parts that matter more than people expect them to. Facilities work gave you that." "It gave me exactly that," Marcus said. "Nobody asks me to deploy anywhere. Nobody calls me away for 6 months at a time. I clean up after other people's long days, and then I go home and have a completely unremarkable evening with my daughter, and most nights, that's the best part of my entire day." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, turning something over in her mind. "I'd like to meet her," she said finally. "Ruby. If that's something you'd be comfortable with." Marcus looked surprised. "You don't have to do anything like that. I didn't tell you about her too." "I know you didn't," Sophia said. "That's exactly why I'd like to. You just told me, plainly, that the most important thing in your life is being present for your daughter's ordinary evenings. I think that's worth knowing about a person. I'd like to actually know you, not just thank you and move on like tonight was a transaction." What followed, in the weeks and months after that night, unfolded slowly and without fanfare, the particular unhurried building of a friendship between two people whose paths had nearly never crossed at all, despite working in the very same building for the better part of 2 years. Sophia, true to her word, met Ruby, first briefly, over hot chocolate at a small cafe near the office, and then more regularly, as the friendship between her and Marcus deepened into something neither of them had anticipated on an ordinary Thursday evening that had so nearly gone very differently. Ruby, it turned out, possessed her father's quiet steadiness along with her own considerable curiosity, and she took an immediate, serious interest in Sophia's job, asking detailed questions about logistics and supply chains with the particular focus of a child who has decided a topic is worth understanding properly. Sophia, for her part, made a quiet decision in the months that followed that she did not announce publicly or attach to any press release. She restructured the company's security protocols not around expensive new technology, but around people, hiring, wherever possible, former service members transitioning out of demanding overseas roles, into steady, predictable positions that allowed them to build the kind of ordinary, present family life that Marcus had been quietly building for years. Before anyone at Callaway Dynamics had any idea what he was actually capable of, Marcus was offered, eventually, a position overseeing the company's full security operations, a role with considerably better pay and considerably more responsibility, which he accepted only after Sophia assured him, repeatedly and sincerely, that the position came with a fixed schedule, no overseas travel, and an unbreakable commitment to him being home for Ruby's dinner and bedtime every single night. Years later, when Ruby was old enough to understand the full shape of what had happened in that elevator on an ordinary Thursday evening, she would ask her father, once, whether he had been scared. Marcus considered the question carefully, the way he considered most things Ruby asked him. For about half a second, he admitted. "And then I just did what needed doing." The fear doesn't really have time to matter, in moments like that. You just act. Were you scared for her? The CEO lady? I was, he said. But mostly, after, I was just glad I happened to be in that hallway at exactly the right moment. Some things in life work out that way. You're just where you're supposed to be, for reasons you don't fully understand until much later. Ruby considered this with her father's own particular thoughtfulness. "I'm glad you were there too," she said simply. "Sophia's one of my favorite people now." "Mine too," Marcus said quietly. "Mine too." And perhaps that is the steady truth tucked inside a story like this one, that the most important people in our lives are sometimes standing quietly nearby, in roles we never think to look closely at, carrying entire histories and capabilities we know nothing about. A man who simply wanted an ordinary evening with his daughter turned out to be exactly the person needed at exactly the right moment, not because he was looking for recognition, but because steadiness, once built carefully and quietly into a life, has a way of showing up precisely when it matters most. Asterisk.